Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we are speaking with Trevor Bullen. He is the Dean of the School of Design at Dunwoody College in Minnesota. Under his umbrella are the Architecture, Interior Design, and Graphic Design programs. Trevor is a broadly experienced architect with more than 25 years of professional practice who has significant international experience, having worked on a wide range of architecture, landscape, architecture, and planning projects in Europe, the Caribbean, and the United States. Bullen received his Master of Architecture from Harvard University, followed by his Master of Studies, Interdisciplinary Design of the Built Environment from Cambridge University in the United Kingdom. Throughout his career, he has taught architectural design at the Boston Architectural College, the City College of New York, as well as the University of Minnesota, and is a frequent guest critic at schools of architecture nationwide. In 2000, Bullen founded the Caribbean Office of Cooperative Architecture in Grenada, where he is originally from. Under his leadership, COCOA went on to become an award-winning architecture and planning consultancy, which successfully completed more than 30 residential, commercial, and industrial projects, including Grenada's new House of Parliament. The work from his firm has been published extensively in journals and books, as well as being exhibited at the 2021 Architecture Biennial in Venice. Most recently, he was a senior associate and director of operations at Snow Kralik Architects, the recipient of the 2018 AIA Architecture Firm Award. Wow, that's a lot. This guy's busy. I want to talk to Trevor about 4 major points today. 1, what is the posture towards or relationship with photography at your design school? 2, what are the top 3 reasons, or number 2, what are the top 3 areas of concern in design education today? Number 3, how is the realm of design education responding to the introduction of AI into our creative process? And number 4, how do we still justify in-person education and massive amounts of debt in today's YouTube educational system? Woo, that's a lot. Let's give it up for Trevor. Okay, Trevor Bullen, thank you for taking the time to talk with us here at Architecture, Design, and Photography.
Trent, thanks for having me.
So I did a whole intro already, and it took me about 2.5 minutes to get through everything that I need to mention for you. So congratulations on doing a lot.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I've got 4 major points I was hoping to be able to talk with you about that I thought you'd be a really good person to shed some light on these things. Let me go through the 4 really quick, and then we'll take them in order to not waste too much of your time, because I imagine you have continuing responsibilities. So, number 1, what is the posture towards or relationship with photography at your design school? Just to start out easy. Number 2, what are the top 3 areas of concern in design education today? Number 3, how is the realm of design education responding to the introduction of AI into our creative process? Number 4, how do we still justify in-person education and massive amounts of debt in today's YouTube education system, essentially? So, number 1, how's the School of Design there at Dunwoody College? What's their posture towards, or how do they deal with photography? What is the philosophy given to the architecture and interior design and graphic design students as it relates to photography?
You know, that's a great question, and I think this is one of those areas where our students are actually ahead of us. We do offer a photography elective that is, you know, it's not a required course, but it's an elective course, and it is well subscribed, and students who are unable to take that class have really expressed to us how much they want to be part of that class and how they would like to see expanded options. So I think, like I said, I think our students are a little bit ahead of us on this. There's a clear demand for it, and I think that was perhaps something that we didn't quite recognize in terms of understanding how well that photography course could really dovetail into all of the other things that we're already doing within the School of Design. And I think one of the things that we're really thinking about with photography is its place as part of the design fundamentals, right? We teach design fundamentals around sort of drawing and 2D design and understanding composition and understanding color and understanding light. But and I think the great thing about photography is it actually encompasses all of those things. But I think we hadn't recognized it as being an integral part of that tool. And so we're in the process of taking a look at our curriculum, and I feel pretty confident that will make its way in there.
Oh, that's interesting that they are kind of asking for that with such an incredibly saturated environment now with photography. Everyone's carrying around, a very basic camera, but a very powerful camera with them all the time, and everyone's engaging now with the act of photography, good or bad. People are engaging with it constantly. My alma mater, Andrews University, where I went to architecture school, I've done a tiny bit of kind of question answer stuff with them, but they did away with their photography program a few years ago. They don't have an specifically architectural photography or anything course like that. But photography is kind of one of those things at some point where it receives a trickle down of attention. It's not really as much a major in education systems anymore. It's, for some reason, architecture, graphic design. I imagine graphic design will go a little bit the way of photography as well, where the primary specific focus on it will start to be a little more outside of the education system because you're able to learn all the things with less in-person education, potentially. I don't know. I hope not, because I think that person-to-person interaction is so incredibly valuable. But that has happened with photography courses. They've kind of been shut down. But I still think there's a huge need for photography and in-person education for those things. And there's probably a huge market, or at least within the educational system, a need for at least intensive courses for these architectural students to be able to somehow understand composition, lighting, and portraying or showing their creations once they're out in the real world to potential clients. So that's the main feedback that I've gotten from architectural students that I've spoken with on this podcast or that I've interacted with at design schools, is the understanding of how to use photography to communicate their design services in the future, essentially. And
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? That it's sort of starting to live in this sort of periphery, right? So we provide a space for our students, and some lighting and a lighting setup and some backdrops for them to photograph their models, for instance. So it's happening sort of on the margins, I think, but we're not being intentional enough about pulling that into the curriculum, I would say. I mean, we do also have we also run a course that is a required course called Architecture and the Moving Image, and that attempts to sort of help students understand how to present their work and how to capture moments in their work within that realm of sort of videography and digital stills and other techniques. But again, I think really centering photography as a pure sort of art form is certainly something that I think we need to reconsider.
Yeah, that's interesting. I came to photography from an architectural background, and I used what I learned in architecture to apply it to the technical aspect of photography. But I had the intuitive, creative side present just as a personality type, but then I had the objective training, if you will, of architecture school overlaid over top of that. And that, first of all, gave me my in with speaking to architects, put me in a place where I could at least speak the language to get a chance. But then when I was able to be put in front of architecture, I knew what I was talking about, what I was looking at, and how specifically architects go through all the pain to get there. It gives you some kind of interest and respect and almost a sacredness in dealing with what you're looking at, because you know how difficult it was to get to that place, but you also know how to communicate it, how to look at it. And I found that early on in my career, I'd have architects telling me what to do, and after a while, architects realized, all right, this guy understands how hard it was to get this baby here. And it's going to be better if I let this person do what they do, because I've seen their track record and they know how to look at architecture like I see architecture, but they know the pain points and they know like that detail must have been really hard. Let's get it,
Yeah.
So
And you see
really
it when the reverse, right? Like I think as an architect who's had, I used to practice in a context where we didn't have readily available photographers who specialize in architectural photography, right? And so you take somebody whose day job is photography, but it's portraits and things, and you ask them to go shoot your building, and you'll be really surprised at what you get back, right? And so that's such an interesting dialogue to have, where I would have these conversations with photographers about like what's important to me, understanding that it may not necessarily be the thing that you would naturally gravitate towards, right? And I think that's such an interesting dialogue to have.
Yeah, if you get someone who's used to shooting portraits, they're dealing with a very curved surface, a face.
Yeah.
It's essentially a ball, like a basketball or volleyball with some texture. And no matter what angle you shoot at it, there's going to be a highlight to shadow gradient happening. But with buildings, most of the time, it's like a 90-degree situation where you have full and none kind of lighting at times. And if people don't pick up that, like, oh, you're at a 1-point perspective, but the light's just hitting this straight on, we can't sense the texture, depth, or detail of this. You need to break that, come to an angle, and have the shadow and the highlight. There's that weirdness. And then when you focus on an interior of a space, it's like you've taken a face and wrapped it inside out and tried to understand it. The first time someone tries to shoot interior architecture, they usually think that they're shooting the exterior of something because you handle everything in that manner. To then shoot interiors is a completely different kind of exercise mentally, where you are all of a sudden looking for a place within a void, essentially, to tell the people where to put their attention. It's a very, very odd thing that's subtle, and you start to understand the value of like an event photographer, wedding photographer, architectural photographer, portrait, animal, whatever. That without those subtleties of education, you only get it through experience or YouTube channels. So
I think the other thing that I always think about, which is unique to architects, of course, is that our media for the most part is space, and so people who are accustomed to photographing objects come to the building and think that what you're interested in is the thing. Where we're interested in the thing, the space that thing creates, right? The negative space left over. And I think that's also one of those really interesting things, because, one of my early experiences was when somebody would photograph something and it would actually highlight some of the imperfections in the craftsmanship of the building, because they were so focused on getting that line. But when, in construction, that line is maybe doing a little bit of this, right? It's sort of, and I'm like, why are you trying to highlight that aspect where, like, it doesn't come together perfectly? It's not that moment I'm interested in. It's what that moment's creating. It's sort of in front of it.
Yeah, it's a weird, a very technically difficult and weird beast, architectural photography. But if as long as you don't overdo it, it's such a high horsepower churn through when you shoot or architecture in a single day. That's a whole podcast on its own that'll go down a rabbit hole that people will be like, what are they talking about? So that's a interesting approach, informative to number one, that you're starting to get this push from students to get more photography courses either back in or just into the education. I agree with that, especially for any design, especially interior architecture, to be able to photograph these built spaces. You can't get what you've done in the presence of all the potential clients you might have. So you have to rely on videography or photography. Renderings don't cut it. They look better than photography now, but there's something in translation of, I can tell that's a rendering, which means you didn't go through all the pain of what normal humans would go through as far as horrible clients, good clients, horrible town, good town, horrible regulations, great, you didn't go through all of it. I need to see I know this is a photograph representation of your work, not a computer-generated model.
Right. I'm always curious about when designers and architects present digitally created renders of a built work.
Yeah,
Because
I'm
I'm always
that's
just
not
like,
a good tell.
yeah, it's not a good tell. I'm almost like, but that's a built project.
You're like, okay, why didn't we photograph this? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's something which is interesting. We're finding now in our post-production. When I got into architectural photography, I knew Photoshop because I would put my studio presentations together in Photoshop. So everyone else was having to tape, glue, draw it, and I would do that, but then I'd photograph it, clip it out, and in Photoshop put it together and make it work. And it was just, oh, okay, I get this. And then when I came to photography, I knew I could do that with a fixed tripod, and then I could bracket in different layers of lighting and everything else and make a more natural look to it, which worked out well for me. But then the ability for post-production came in where you could go to the nth degree and kind of get to a place where it looked like a rendering because it was too perfect. Now we're experiencing that pushback with clients to say, I want it to look a little more dirty, a little less perfect. Because we're just experiencing, I think, a societal trend over time where you first get that ability to go to this place. And so you're like, go to that place, it'll be amazing. And for a time, it's like a fashion and it looks great. But then it changes. And now we're kind of trending back, I think, towards a little more natural, darker shadows, a little bit more blown out highlights to where it feels real. You have to have that little bit of dirt. And I think especially leading into our other question about AI, that's going to play a huge part. To me, also in the back of my head is the arts that will remain are going to be very, very authentic art, seen as where AI comes in and can make everything perfect, which is interesting. So that's question number 3. We'll try not to jump there too quickly. Question number 2. What are the top 3 areas of concern in design education today?
Well, wow, there's so many. I think one of the hardest things in design education is I think that the first one is that we are in a period of rapid change. And
Age of Aquarius, if you will.
Yeah, and so it's hard to stay ahead, right? Like industry is moving forward at a pretty fast clip, and that we see that in terms of some of the software that industry is using, where all of a sudden the industry standard is in a place where some of our faculty members who maybe haven't been in industry don't have those tools to now impart on our students.
So the students teach them,
right? Or we do like a lot of schools rely on some adjuncts who are working. But we then need to really rely on these folks coming in and bringing that. I think there is a certainly with the Black Lives Matter movement and just this sort of overall sort of societal reckoning. There's a real understanding that we need to do a better job of being sort of equitable and inclusive in our work and in our design. And again, those are things that I think our students are really like, hey, how do we do a better job of this? And this is not unique to schools, but I think usually schools are on the leading edge of these things. And I think we're really trying to work through this, right? So on sustainability issues, I think that the academy was leading and then kind of pulled industry with them. This is one that we're like, both industry and the academy are both like, what do we do? How do we get there? How do we address these pressing issues? So I think that for me, that's one of the big ones is, we want to be on the leading edge, but it's getting harder and harder to be there and stay there in this changing realm. I think the other one is related to technology, which is that, I don't know how to put this, but I would say that, because we have all these digital tools and we have the digital, we have the YouTube University, I think some of the time we see, particularly with our students, is that they're sort of there's a sophistication in some of their ability to produce a certain product that is ahead of the fundamentals, making and thinking skills, right? And so, I'll give you, I was talking to a colleague earlier today about how we had I had somebody that I'd worked with a while ago who had very, very good technical skills, like with CAD and Revit, but couldn't quite had a really hard time working through a problem with a stairwell, because in Revit the stairwells are auto-generated, and when I was saying to them, hey, don't you understand, given the rise and the run, these are the things that need to happen. So the skill on the computer side really had kind of masked the fact that some of their fundamentals in understanding space and the relationship of things, because the technology was doing certain things for them. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at. We're looking at a sort of really building a new curriculum that has which has a foundation semester that is really very deliberately and intentionally building some of these foundational skills of craft and making and understanding and composition, so that once so that we work from the analog to the digital, right? Sometimes the digital comes first, and then some of those analog skills are maybe lagging a bit.
Well, that's really interesting. The technical capabilities these days can be far beyond the fundamental capabilities of a human, and that's just kind of part of the risk in any significant advance in technology. Comes at some cost to the human experience. Yeah, and with everything being able to be kind of auto-generated by AI and or at least software that has programming that does these things for you, you start to not even realize, like, well, how do we do the rise and run? That's a loss of, like, how many of us could make our own food if we needed to? How many of us could make a computer if we, how do you deal with that as these, and this is probably a very good segue into the AI conversation. How do you keep a generation of people from going too far beyond, like, knowing anything about where their food comes from, knowing anything about how to design a stairwell, knowing anything about how to run a government? Everything's becoming so incredibly automated and done for us because of the advances in technology. We lose just a huge amount of very, very foundational skills and pieces of wisdom, if you will, that stay with you throughout the day. I wanted to come back to, you had listed two things there, that kind of the technological advance and needing to stay ahead of it with the fundamental things, but also you had said there's a difficulty in staying on the cutting edge of inclusion and equality. Am I recounting that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
What do you mean by that?
So I view issues of equity and issues of sustainability as essentially two sides of the same coin, right? So what we do, at its core, we have to recognize that we are charged as sort of residents of this planet, right? Of managing these resources, right? That we're given. And for essentially creating a better environment. At least that's what we as designers are aspiring to do. And part of that is to be wise with our resources and be equitable in the way in which we're putting these resources out into the world and who's accessing it, right? So that to me, that's sort of fundamental, right? And we just haven't been that great about it. And I think, once you recognize that you have an issue, I think most designers at their core are problem solvers. It's one of the things that we love about design. Like, there's this thing and that we're able to use our creative energy to solve. And I think that, this is where the moment is ahead of us, right? We we recognize that we haven't always created the most equitable spaces. We haven't always created an educational system that expresses the values of all of us. It mostly represents and expresses the values of a subset of society who has essentially decided and been the gatekeeper of deciding what's valuable, what's beautiful, where do we draw our inferences and our histories from, right? And so opening that up is not as easy as it would seem, right? Because things are lost in translation. You need more people at the table to fully have that conversation. And I think that is one of those areas where, again, like I said, with a lot of sustainability discourse, particularly in architecture, a lot of that was driven by the academy. But this is one where both the industry and the academy are flailing, in my viewpoint, struggling to kind of understand, how do we respond to this challenge? How are we more equitable? How do we bring more people to the table? And I just think we're kind of trying to work our way through it in real time.
Yeah, that's that you make some really interesting points that up till this time in our current up to this time in this country, it's been a very singular kind of interpretation of, I guess, the majority population railroaded into the people that had the power and the opportunities, just framed all commercial opportunities, everything kind of into a narrow window, and said everyone jump through that window. And to say, all right, we can absolutely broaden that window. What is it that was valuable about everything that we've done up to this point? Keep that. What is the bad things we've done up to this point? Get rid of that. And how do we now make this fair and equitable across the board? The difficulty in that is that we've had this memory of how everything has been, and then we see it change quickly. And for people who have been used to that, people over 40 are going to be a little shocked by that. But it's got to be the same feeling as when I was 20 to 25, and things were changing at that time in the way that they were changing back then. People my age back then were probably like, why are these boys wearing long hair? They should not be. You need to cut your. And I had long hair, and it's fine, Yeah. Every generation deals with the pushback and the push, and I think pushing towards fair and equitable and is the absolute right thing to do. The difficulty is discerning, insisting on either a equality of outcome or an equality of opportunity. Now, if you present an opportunity, there's still that subjective idea there that, it's fair for everybody. But if it's equality of outcome, it's a forced outcome, which at the same time, if you force against human will, it's also a false outcome. So there's a tension between those two ideas.
And of course, we just have to recognize, the role that, we as designers like to think, well, we bring all this stuff and we don't have all this baggage. What we do, but we also have to recognize that our clients, right? I mean, we have to recognize that for the most part, as designers, our clients usually represent the top 5%, right? And that's a really small group of folks who are sort of controlling or at least setting the stage for what it is that we do. I was joking with a colleague the other day about, I had a corporate client like in their boardroom up in the 60th floor of a skyscraper, asked me about how I could make their space more equitable and feel more inviting. And I just thought, well, it's the wrong space. I mean, you've got to get through a gauntlet of security to make your way up to the C-suite. That's not the right question to be asking, right? And I think that's part of it, right? Is we're not entirely sure which questions to be asking. We're not entirely sure how to deliver a process. I think there are a lot of people who are they're fumbling their way through it, but we're not doing it very well yet. And I'm hopeful, obviously, that we as designers, as smart, creative thinkers, that we can continue to evolve our practice to make it better and more equitable.
Yeah, I really do think we're doing the right thing, but I think we're doing it in a clumsy manner. And you halfway expect that in a country with our history, that it's going to be difficult. We're far more of this contrast. If you talk to Europeans or Asians or anyone else from around the world, America specifically has this tension in it right now because of our history that we're trying to deal with. And I think it's proper that we air that out and we deal with it and we make it fair, equitable, and real moving forward. The difficulty, I think, is that you have to start, I think, at the individual level. So we start to feel it, we start to enact it in the person-to-person, in the person-to-opportunity level. And then the next thing is, well, how do we not just do this as individuals? How do we do this as businesses? Because as you get bigger as a business, you can just simply take more resources. You don't have to fairly and equitably distribute your, information at Raytheon or Lockheed Martin. No, we're not spreading our secret information around. But wouldn't that be fair to all the other businesses and countries? And then as a country, you have to think more equitably and openly as well. And that it does call for a more fair and equitable earth at the same time, too. So it's just such a interesting.
It's complex, and I can share with you just ways in which we're looking at it, right? So you talked about the individual, which I think is super important in that sort of interpersonal and just educational space. But I think there's also some, but there are these systemic levels as well, right? So, we have started to rethink what it is that we're looking at in terms of like when you admit a student, right? There was a time. Or there's still where we like generally in society like this idea of a well-rounded student who has maybe done some sporting events, has maybe done some travel, has really done some things. Well, what that does is that clearly biases people who have the ability to do those extracurriculars, to maybe travel, to do those things. And so our lens is to say, hey, maybe you had to take care of a sibling or a grandparent, or you had to hold a job. We value that just as much as if you did that trip to Rome or that semester abroad. Those two things both can show really interesting things. And that's where, at a systemic level, we need to look at it. We used to, at our institution, have an award for attendance. Where if you had this great attendance, and then we were like, wait a minute, what that award does is what it's rewarding. We were using it as a proxy for your commitment to the program, like you're showing up all the time. But really what it is, it's a proxy for your ability to show up because you've got a reliable car, right? I'll give you an example. I had a student who's the only one in their family who had a driver's license, had younger siblings and parents. So when the younger sibling got sick, well, yeah, they were going to be late or they weren't going to show up that day because they had to take their younger sibling too. And so we recognized that although we were using it as a proxy for somebody's dedication, that was not actually. And so that's, I think at a system level, we can begin to think about those things that we do that naturally privilege or bias the outcomes and begin to rethink those. And these are fairly simple ways of sort of reassessing some of the things that we do. But I do think over time that also at a systems level as well as the individual level, we can start to make some change.
There's got to be a way of creating a ratio between family wealth in comparison to dedicated commitment shown on the individual's part. So like very low family wealth, but yeah, I got a job at 16 and I attended that job religiously, and I didn't get to go to Europe or anything else, but I showed like I'm determined, I'm committed. I showed this, like, in that number that comes out of that, maybe that has like some real effect of like, okay, well, Johnny got to go and, travel on daddy's credit card around Europe and use that. But your family wealth is, 5 million, and your commitment to doing anything that took determination was about 2. So your score is going to be about 2%, where someone who has 0 family wealth but showed commitment and reliability and everything else, and who will get that experience through going to school, maybe they're, I'm sure there's ways we'll be able to socially engineer this into a better direction. But
and I think it starts by just simply asking the question, right? Like, where if we ask the question on an application like, did you hold a job while you were in high school? As opposed to like, just list your extracurriculars, right?
Right.
Because we've given you a space to highlight your extracurriculars. We have not given you the opportunity to highlight your jobs.
Right.
So again, it's simply asking the question and allowing a more complex reading of the individual.
Yeah, and especially while you're in, the architecture school that I went to, there was very few people who could actually work while they were in school. It required so much time. Like the PT students and pre-med students, like if you had a job, you had to have something where you were monitoring something and able to study or work at the same time. And so, all right. Now, the next thing, I guess, is AI. That is just a huge meteor coming at our psyche at a fundamental level. Like what we're able to accomplish is drastically changing at the foundational level because of this integration of AI. How has the educational system, it's really the first year that we're dealing with ChatGPT and all these other things coming online that are just a bomb being dropped in how we work as humans creatively. I thought it was going to be manual jobs and robots in lower kind of, lower on the scale between intellect and physical, but it went right to intellect and we're toast. Like what's happening now? What is the response?
In academy, right, we're being reactive, unfortunately, right? We and I think in general, it came up so quickly that nobody really had an opportunity to get the guardrails in place and kind of be able to have a robust policy around these issues. So of course we've already had students submit papers and other things that faculty have flagged, and then when we've dug deeper, we found out these were AI generated papers and other things. And I think so. On the one hand, there's the reactive stuff, which is now there's software available to help you detect AI generated content, and it's not perfect. So that's one challenge. I think the bigger challenge though is to lean into it and try to understand how best we as individuals, as designers, can leverage the power of AI for the work that we do. And so we have a graphic design faculty member who has really had students kind of working through like, if this is the prompt, then what happens, right? So using AI as part of the iterative process to kind of flush out some ideas and understanding if you put this in, then these are the things that you tweak that help influence the outcome. Really kind of systematically understanding how certain prompts and in what order those outcomes happen. So there's that. I think the thing that I am looking at really carefully is how it's potentially going to impact the profession and how we address it with students. So there are a couple of firms. There's a company out of Canada, I don't want to give them a plug, but that I've subscribed because they're about to launch this program that basically does schematic design. You put in the site context, you put in the program, and basically what it does is it'll just rifle through all of the massing options and proximities and adjacencies, right? Because those are some real constraints. You've got physical constraints, you've got some vertical constraints, and you've got these blocks of program. And so it does this sort of schematic level.
Wow.
There's another program that's similar to that that's being used. I think it's a company out of Texas that's mostly being marketed right now to more like developer types, basically saying, you got a plot of land, we can run like, 1,000 scenarios of how to like maximize. And we've already seen some of that, right? There's some like for parking ramps, there's already some software that does some of the similar things like that, which can maximize the layout of parking and other things. So I think in my mind, that's probably the way it's really going to impact our industry as architects. And my fear is that it's going to continue to drive the cost of our services down. And there's no doubt in my mind that CAD, when it was first introduced, helped drive our costs down again. I mean, it was it's just is what it is. We were more efficient, so we could charge less, and I think this is also going to do some of that. Or I think that we're going to find ourselves where our clients have already crunched the numbers in AI and then said, this is the optimal building envelope. I need you to design a building with this envelope because I know I've maximized my square footage and all, and my parking and I've,
right.
And so I think that's going to be the challenge. And so we're going to need to be able to demonstrate a mastery of it in response, so that we're able to talk to our clients in a smart way.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's basically a site schematic idea generator that you're just kind of pulling the bingo thing, and it's resetting each time. You're like, all right, we'll take an aspect of that, do it again, maybe that, and yeah, that's how. I immediately go to what is going to be the downside of that, and you can't quite comprehend it. When COVID first started, I knew there would be a silver lining to it as far as, we realize we can work remotely far better and we can have better tools of communication. There's a silver lining to it. There is. But like when cell phones and smartphones came on, like I'm only now realizing how much I preferred the anonymity and the lack of that constant, we're too connected now in our thinking and our processing. Like we used to have to get information from other humans, and it provided a net of community and relationship and thought and process, and I'd have to hear something from someone who could be categorized as a Trump supporter and a Biden and a RFK and it was just all in a natural day. Now everything you need is filtered, tribalized, divided, and it's just such that technology, you can just look up anything you want whenever you want, and it's amazing, but it comes at such a weird, unexpected cost for our community, for our society, but at a benefit at the same time too. So I wonder, in that endless ability to generate ideas in the designer through AI, what is going to be the downside? Because it is difficult to come up with those continual ideas and processes and kind of like, well, let's sprinkle a little Wes Anderson feel in here, and maybe that'll be cool, or a little more Bram Stoker's Dracula to this cabin. You get these that you can prompt, and then AI will just kind of generate it into an architectural model. It's just insane. Did you mention what those program names were, or are you leaving that off?
No, I wasn't going to give them a plug, but only one of them comes to my head right now. Do you want me to tell you which it is?
Oh, I'd probably track them down and try and get them to come on a podcast.
Oh, sure. The one that I remember off the top of my head is called Make It, MAKET.ai. And that's the Canadian firm. I don't remember the one that's based out of Texas, but there's that other one.
Make It AI, or what is it?
I think it's Make It AI, MAKETAI. Yeah.
All right, I'll check that out later.
Yep.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
But I think, to your point earlier, when you were asking, like, at what cost, I do think, like, what the first thing that we started with, it kind of comes full circle, where I was talking about how students, like, the technology gets ahead of students. I think what I worry about is the discernment, right? Where AI produces something and it looks great. But your ability to really critically evaluate the tangible benefits, that's where I worry. And that's where I feel like if you have the fundamentals, then you're able to critically assess what AI is giving you.
Right.
But if some of those fundamental skills aren't great, you're going to be taking that and with a quick glance be like, this is the best thing, and then you'll go down that road, and that's what I worry about most.
It's going to be the difference between being told something and experiencing something.
Yep.
And it's in the difference between not knowing and then getting to a place of knowing through experience is that you're gifted wisdom in the process. The difference in the other thing is you go from knowing to knowing simply having been told. You lack the wisdom in that process. And AI generates way too much convenience in the knowing without needing to go through the experience or gain the wisdom through experience to then just simply knowing. It's like handing a gun to a kid rather than training a soldier to safely do what they're supposed to do. So it's, I imagine we'll see some really interesting things that have some really obvious bad things about them in the future that will probably be an Instagram feed of AI architecture fails maybe. So. All right, question number 4 to round this out. How do you still justify in-person education and massive amounts of debt in today's YouTube educationally available system?
I think there's some things. So first of all, let me say that, one of the things at Dunwoody is that we do have an online Bachelor of Architecture program that runs in parallel with our on-ground Bachelor of Architecture program. So we have embraced the flexibility that it requires that the folks have different modalities, and of course, I think that helps, right? So we are hoping to adjust that, but I think the fundamental question that particularly for design fields is that we actually don't have a very good return on investment, right? I think that other professions where students come out with a ton of debt, they make a lot more money, and so it's much easier to say, well, I went to school for all this time, it took all this time, and then and I finally got to where I'm going, and I'm able to pay that debt off quickly. I think in the design professions, we're really lagging in that indicator, right? I think one of the things that we see, and even our online students will tell you, is that there's a certain amount of learning that happens right outside of the classroom, right, from your peers, looking over their shoulders at what they do as part of the process. And when we're online and when we're doing things off of YouTube, we are in our silo. We are just by virtue of that physical space. And so there's some aspects of that learning that's more challenging, right? And we try to address some of these things. For instance, I'm teaching a studio right now where all of our students are putting their work on a Miro board, and then as part of the class, as part of the requirements, students are forced to comment on each other's work to kind of, almost force this natural interaction of observation and also just sort of critique of each other, right? But that is not the same on a Miro board as it is in person. And I think that's one of the things that's missing. I think there's also just, one of the things that's hard is facilities, right? We have a pretty fantastic fabrication lab that our students can kind of go in and kind of get lost and kind of experiment. And it's great. Our online students are able to send their files in, let's say to get something 3D printed, but we not everybody's got the facilities at home to be able to just experiment and play and there's a certain amount of discovery that just comes from the doing, and so if you're sending it in to have somebody else do it, there's some aspect of that learning as well that's not happening. So I think the world is changing, and I think there's definitely a place for some folks who might, there are folks in rural areas in particular who join our program online. There are folks who have families or who have other work commitments, and that's why they choose that online. And so I think there's going to be these parallel paths, but I think there's always going to be a subset of students for whom that interaction, that in-person is just going to respond really well for them. And having seen my son, who's in high school, really struggle in the pandemic for the virtual, like it just didn't work for him. My daughter, not a problem. Continued to get straight A's, no biggie, right? But for some people, I think it just goes to your learning style and how best you take in and process that information.
Yeah, is there a significant difference in extrovert to introvert between your kids that plays into that, you think? Or?
I think so, for sure. Yeah. So my son is much more introverted. And so I think just being by himself in his room, just that didn't help him, which is, it's kind of interesting because you might think that, well, maybe the extrovert could create their own community. But, I think he needs that little extra, even though he's happy hanging out on the margins, he needs that little bit of contact to be at his best.
Yeah. Very interesting. A lot of interesting things that we're dealing with in this day and age, but luckily we got a lot of really good technology to help out, and we also have a lot of good technology that'll take us out if we're not careful. Yeah. So hopefully we wisely and carefully walk that tightrope as a species.
Well, and there have been some real benefits. Like this kind of a call wouldn't have happened not too long ago, right? And being able to connect this way over Zoom is really helpful, and it has fundamentally transformed the way in which we work and do lots of other things.
Yeah, I really do believe that there is a new and different form of intelligence that has always been with us as a species, but the type of intelligence that we've had that hasn't been as easy to unlock is now being unlocked much more easily, because you can take in conversations like this between two people, or you can listen to a lecture very, very easily, whereas before you had to read a book. I can't read a book to save my life. I'll get through the paragraph, and I will have said the words in my head, but I'll have a second conversation going on behind that in my head, and I can't remember the words I read, even though I read them. And now if I listen to a PhD level conversation between two PhD, individuals, I can okay, I'm getting it. And I'll get 10% of what they said, and I'll listen to it 100 times. And then by that time I'm like, oh, I could have this conversation now. But it's because I'm hearing it, not because I'm visually having to process symbols into words that I then translate and try and compete with the other conversations going on in my head. So I think it'll be interesting to see the empowered capabilities of those who were not seen as intelligent in the past because of the limitations of read knowledge that you'd have to read into your circumstance or pay someone to lecture you directly for that time. Now we can just endlessly watch it on YouTube, endlessly pick up these conversations on podcasts. And if you choose the right ones, you're going to grow in an incredible way. If you choose to indulge in the wrong ones, you're going to become, separated and extremified. What do they call that? I forget the term for that. But anyways.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank.
Well, radicalized. That's right. There we are. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here today and share what you're doing within the educational system that you are leading out there for the design school at Dunwoody. It was really nice to get someone who's at the forefront of thinking about these things proactively and seeing how our education system and everything else is going to react to that. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I've really appreciated it.
We really appreciate you having me, Trent. This has been a great chat. I appreciate it.